When I first watched this anime, I said, wow, I have never ever been more seen as an adult. And maybe it's because I've grown up to be one of those adults that's extremely jaded, so now I don't believe anything society tells me anymore. And while I may appear to be a little carefree, go-lucky, and like someone who frolics in the flowers at times, in reality, I quite often hate everything and want to do nothing but whatever the I want. This anime, Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan, took me through an experience where I realized I have experienced some of the very same things the characters were experiencing in this anime and manga, but also took me through an experience where some of the things that some of these characters went through, where I unconsciously experienced but could not define, it helped me understand meaning. In this episode, we'll be diving into what makes Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan a must-watch anime for every single adult anime fan, and how it emulates quite possibly everything that we experience in adulthood. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Melt. If you haven't been here before, I'm Mel, the host of this channel. And if you've never been here before, make sure you subscribe before you watch the rest of this video. So as mentioned in the intro, we will be talking about the anime Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan and how it emulates adulthood. But before we dive into the very specific examples that it touches upon in regards to adulthood, I'll give you a synopsis as how we usually do it here. Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan is about Uramichi, who is a 31-year-old host on a kids TV show. He leads exercise routines and teaches life lessons colored by one main theme: adulthood sucks. And alongside mascots played by a couple of bushy-tailed 20-somethings and a singing duo whose music embodies the notion of being kicked while you're down, Uramichi wades through the misery of working life, one sardonic comment at a time. So if that didn't explain it to you, this anime is all about the different lessons that Uramichi has learned in adulthood, how he tries to convey it to the children on this show in some of the most cryptic and sarcastic ways possible. And all of these life lessons are in relation to the adulthood that he has been experiencing up until this point. And while this may sound depressing, unfortunately, they use the sadness, frustration, and depression of our main character and supporting characters as a comedy device. So when you watch, you'll find yourself laughing hysterically at times, but also self-reflecting as to how sad this truly is, especially if what is being discussed is something you've experienced yourself. And while I'd love to highlight all those humorous moments, that's not what we're here for today. Today we're here to talk about all the different adult themes and experiences that are presented within the anime and within the manga. And while this list may not be the full extent of what is described within the anime and manga, here are some of the higher level points that is carried throughout the story consistently. Our first biggest and glaring theme of adulthood and adulting within this anime is the feeling of complacency, the feeling of helplessness, and fluctuation in emotions due to life's difficulties, frustrations, and depression, which could sometimes be confused with indifference. Here are some ways it presents itself. We see it most when it comes to our main character, Uramichi. And you can say that all of this starts with his failed career as a professional gymnast. At a time when Uramichi was in college, and we get to learn about his backstory and how he meets some of the other characters that he is friends with, we learn that he was a semi-optimistic guy who was genuinely hardworking and appeared to enjoy the sport of gymnastics. And he was quite good at it. At the time, he was also still approachable. Not quite super approachable, but more approachable than he is today. But we discover some things about Uramichi due to his failure to become a professional gymnast. Even if he did go pro, he was kind of forced to train aggressively and constantly by his father as a young child, so who's to say he wouldn't have snapped the way he snaps now once he became a professional gymnast. Now we find ourselves today, Uramichi is a gymnast Oniisan on the show of Together with Mama, which is basically the whole setting or most of the setting of the story of Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan, where he is stuck with a feeling of helplessness because he has no other skills to go do anything else or to work elsewhere, since he spent a good portion of his youth trying to become a professional gymnast. So all he has left is his gymnast skills and his strength and his very strong core and build. This development is what you could say leads us to where Uramichi is now and how he feels. We often see the massive swing in Uramichi's feelings, which can vary from frustration frustration to annoyance to depression and sometimes indifference when he has no energy. And the worst part about this is that not only can we see it as an audience, maybe due to the fact that we've been there before, but the children also highlight his volatility in emotions, how he can go from really happy, and this is mostly a false happiness, to extremely depressed. You can see it in different moments when he's interacting with some of the other characters, more notably Usahara. Usahara is the guy who plays Usao-kun, the rabbit mascot, on the show of Together with Mama. And at times, Uramichi acts very indifferent towards Usahara, mostly in regards to when he senses Usahara is about to talk about him, but Usahara sees him and stops himself from doing so. Uramichi just explains in his own monologue that he just can't be bothered, he doesn't have the energy, and he would prefer to neglect and ignore what's about to go down. But unfortunately, later on in the same chapter and episode, he catches Usahara actually talking about him to the other cast members. And while he was indifferent before, it leads him into an extreme fit of rage. Another instance is when Uramichi, who normally wakes up very depressed at the thought that it's another work day, it's Monday and it's morning again, it's Wednesday and it's morning again, he must go to work. In the one moment that he wakes up on the right side of the bed one day, he's super cheerful, walks into work, and he's like, wow, I feel invincible today, I feel great. How many of you have felt that way? Just for that mood to collapse right before work's about to start. We see this example happen with Uramichi. The way he goes from super gleeful, invincible, and happy to downright depressed and sad is unbearably relatable. And I think some of these things that Uramichi experiences in the range of his emotions in very short periods of time just goes to show that sometimes when we become indifferent or complacent to something that we dislike or something that we've just gotten used to over time, there will often be sparks of emotion on any random given day, and no one will ever tell when it's about to happen. And additionally, if you intentionally are trying to be indifferent because you know these things frustrate you, you can't help but let them get to you because this is not something you want to be experiencing. And the wild thing about it all is that Uramichi shows this reluctance about going to work, lack of desire to do anything. But as I mentioned, sometimes there are these random emotions that give in where we see Uramichi actually wants to contribute to his job, despite the fact that he tries to ignore it and derail some scripts at times. And the whole reasoning behind this is that at a point, Uramichi realizes that if he's going to continue to do this and he has no other way out of this job, this occupation that takes up much of his life and much of his time, he might as well make the best use of it and make it meaningful despite him not understanding what makes his time meaningful anymore. An example is episode 3, when the director asks Uramichi to stay after work late. Even though Uramichi kind of expresses like, I kind of don't want to, bro. But he takes on the responsibility, starts doing the work, gets frustrated, gets depressed. You see all the range of emotions that he goes through, and then he just kind of collapses and defaults to not wanting to do anything. Then he starts to think about life and what it even means to live life, what it means to use your time meaningfully. And he comes to the conclusion, as I mentioned earlier, that if he has to do this, he might as well make the best of it. And maybe, just maybe, he'll get rewarded for his hard work. So we see that sometimes this complacency, this helplessness, and often hopelessness as to what you're doing in life and what you should do in life leads you to question and to wonder how to even live life meaningfully. We see Uramichi question this multiple times throughout the series. But Uramichi isn't the only one that feels this helplessness, this complacency to the life that they're living. Utano, one of the other cast members, the Oniisan, on Together with Mama, wanted to become a professional singer. She went to this extreme elite musical school. She tried to become an idol. That failed. She became an enka singer. That failed. And then she became a nightclub jazz singer. That failed. Unfortunately, due to massive bad luck and poor timing, she is now the singing Oniisan on Together with Mama. So she has nothing left to look forward to when it comes to her singing career. And because of this, she's kind of poured all her eggs into one basket in hopes that her boyfriend of 6 years, who is a failing comedian, will propose to her so she can get married. But unfortunately, her boyfriend doesn't seem to be getting the hint. And anytime she sees anything in regards to marriage or engagements, whether that be her friends on social media, or if somebody triggers such a conversation on the show that she works on, she dives into mass hysteria and gets extremely upset. But she's another character that we often see very indifferent to her job, and she kind of is trying to get by. And the last adult that I want to highlight in this theme of helplessness, complacency, and somewhat indifference is Usahara. Usahara is the example and the epitome of an adult that has no goals, never strived for anything himself, and is unconscious to the fact that he has led himself to the circumstances that he's currently in. And while he does have frustrations like some of the other characters, his frustrations, as I mentioned, are created by his own circumstances. Can't afford rent, girls don't like him, doesn't have a girlfriend, but he's unwilling to change himself, and by default is essentially complacent with the life that he's living. Moving on to another adult theme, especially when you start working, is the harassment and overworking in the workplace. This is mostly demonstrated in the power struggle dynamic between the director and Uramichi, and sometimes the other cast members. As mentioned in the earlier example, sometimes the director forces overtime upon Uramichi despite the fact that he refuses and doesn't really want to do it and doesn't see reason in some of these things that he ends up doing. But some really large examples of this are two in particular that I will never forget, and that's when they shoot a summer music video at the beach in the middle of winter time wearing summer clothes, and two, when they shoot a winter music video in the summertime while bundled in scarves and overcoats. You can see that the characters are stressed out, they're cold while they're at the beach in the middle of winter wearing nothing but swimsuits and playing in the water as directed by the director, and you can see that they're about to collapse and die from overheating when wearing these very thick coats and these scarves and these gloves as the sun is beaming down on them. But what's very rare to see, and a character that we have not mentioned, is Kumatani, who is usually this very chill character. He seems to be the more stable of the adults on this show, as he has hobbies. He kind of works to get money and then goes to do his own thing after work. He doesn't let work define himself in his life, but you see him break. This is something that he doesn't do often on the show of Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan, and fully takes out his rage on the director as he is overheating during the winter music video shoot in this bear suit that he wears, as he plays Kumao-kun on Together with Mama. And Uramichi, who is the type to rebel against some of the scripts and some of the ideas that the director has, he ultimately always goes along with it. So he was very shocked to see Kumatani basically go all out rageful on the director. It was to the point that we thought as the audience and even the cast members that Kumatani would get fired. But I guess surprisingly so, they like him enough or they need him that they kept him around and kind of just avoided him. The director was like, okay, just tell me what you need and we got you covered. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't always work for everyone. I think it can be clearly said that sometimes when we go to work, we have to experience some of these things, no matter what type of job that we do, whether it's corporate or other. And we see that Uramichi, as mentioned earlier, he tries to comply even though he's not willing to. There is an episode and chapter in which the director just tells him, hey, you just walk onto the set normal every time. It's kind of boring. Let's try something different for the cameras. Can you do some backflips for us? And Uramichi, though a gymnast and still fit, at 31 years old, he's not as flexible and agile as he used to be. So you see him doing these backflips for the camera, and the director is supposed to be watching, but he's not. He's distracted. And ultimately, we don't know if we went with any of the backflip cuts that they filmed because he was not paying attention. The director was not there for it, despite him making this request. And he had Uramichi do the backflips multiple times because he was not watching. And we see some other smaller supporting characters like Kikaku, who is a very angry coworker that works in, I guess you could say, the background at the studio, who pulls and drags Uramichi into his shenanigans in hopes that he will get help, blaming Uramichi for creating these new ideas that increases Kikaku's workload. The overworking and power harassment is present in nearly every single episode. Have you ever felt a loss in confidence in your own abilities as you get older? Maybe it's due to the fact that your body just doesn't comply with the way it used to move. Well, in Uramichi's case, because he works on a children's show, and if you're familiar with the language system in Japan, he often finds himself not being able to read kanji, which is the Japanese alphabet that's usually taught after a certain age. So I'm assuming that since the show, Together with Maman, usually has kids that are the ages of 4 and 5. They probably don't know kanji, which leads Uramichi to lose some of those skill sets. And they go on to explain how just growing older, maybe your occupation or the fact that your body just can't do things anymore, leads to these loss in skills and loss in abilities, which kind of starts to make you question what you can even do anymore. While this example is not glaringly potent and described throughout the series of Uramichi Oniisan, you can kind of see this in some of the characters here and there as they've lost confidence in themselves as adults to perform in a certain way. This one's another pretty big theme that's prominent in the story of Uramichi Oniisan, and that's the struggle and the need to mask one's feelings, whether it's for society or in the workplace. And I think all of us can say that if you've worked in more or less a corporate setting, but other work settings, you've probably felt the need to mask how you feel due to certain circumstances or whatever is going on in meetings. Because first and foremost, corporate society sucks. The whole hierarchy system that we have to adhere to sucks. But because we need the money to survive, we go in with these big smiles on our faces, do what our bosses tell us to do, and then come home upset, sometimes a little bit depressed, and we kind of just want to watch TV and crash. This is highlighted in the very first episode of Uramichi Oniisan and in the first chapter as well, that sometimes, and it's not rare for an adult to have 2 or 3 or multiple sides to them. They wear multiple faces to get through society and get through the day, because sometimes being our most raw and authentic selves could lead to some issues. And we do get to see the different sides of Uramichi, as he is this fake happy-go-lucky person on the show Together with Maman for his job. He kind of needs to be. He's working with children all day. But then once he's off the clock, he's this really moody, depressed, kind of indifferent looking guy, very monotone looking face with some deadness in the eyes. Large contrast to how he acts on the show. But he struggles even while wearing this fake smile and wearing this facade for the children, because his frustration and his annoyance seeps through with sarcasm. We can often see this through Uramichi's pettiness, where in the first episode, they do this thing called the ABC exercise. But I guess because he's kind of fed up with the studio, he decides to not do the song. He said, hey, we're gonna do the Uramichi song today. That song is filled with his experiences and his angst as an adult. And you're hearing these children sing this song. So at first, he's just going against the grain and going completely against the script, because you could see what I'm assuming is the producer going like this behind the camera. And there are multiple instances that Uramichi intentionally messes up the script and the segment for the shows, where it is stated by some of the other cast members or by the narrator that they had to do multiple reshoots. But at the end of the day, when he is faced with his higher ups and they ask him to work overtime or they ask him to work on a project that he has no interest in working on, he complies. He masks his feelings, he masks his emotions, and he said, okay, I guess I'm doing this. Got it. If you were paying attention to when I was describing Uramichi's backstory and him becoming a gymnast earlier, you'll know that he was kind of pushed into becoming a gymnast. This highlights a very prominent thing that we like to talk about now as adults, and that's dealing with the trauma we had in our childhood. Sometimes if we don't deal with that trauma accordingly, that carries with us into adulthood. We see this example with Uramichi Oniisan when he is asked to draw his father for a Father's Day segment show that they're doing, I think, at a mall. And the way that he draws his father is him and his younger sibling being tossed around by their father because they wouldn't practice gymnastics. Let's digest that for a quick second. Uramichi, 31 years old. We can tell that he doesn't deal with a lot of his emotions very well. Clearly, he's not seeing a therapist. But he also seems to have a lot of unresolved baggage with his father. And it leads me to even question, like, it seems like most of your life has not gone the way that you've wanted. And maybe that's kind of what's led you to this point. Being forced to become a gymnast, does not go pro, is now stuck on this children's show as the gymnast Oniisan, and now you feel helpless, frustrated, annoyed, and depressed. But I don't think he really realized how he was feeling until he drew this picture, and some of his cast members were looking at him like, bro, that's kind of dark, are you okay? So please, people, if you have childhood trauma that you need to deal with, especially regarding to your family, handle it. because it might continue to weigh you down for the rest of your adulthood. Here's one that's kind of subtle. The fact that when you become an adult, there is the loss and evidently the death of your childhood. And what's really funny and ironic about this is that when we're children, we always say that I can't wait to become an adult. When I become an adult, I am going to do this. When I become an adult, I will finally have the freedom to do whatever I want. But the irony is that when you're a child, you have quite possibly the most freedom possible to do whatever you want within the confines of what your parents deem are okay. And what drives this home a little bit more is that when you think about it, you don't have responsibilities as a kid. You don't have worries, you don't have to pay bills, you don't have the expectations of society weighing on you as much as a child as you do once you become an adult. And I think a lot of this comes from the fact that when Uramichi is his sarcastic, depressed self with the children on the show, the children kind of pity him a lot. And Uramichi goes out of his way to make examples of saying, you have freedom, you have hope still. Continue to be a child, because when you grow older and you become an adult, you lose all of that. And the last thing I want is for you children to become like me. One theme I think that we can all empathize with is the hardship of making friends in adulthood. As we know, Uramichi is kind of very lonely. He's alone and lonely. Two different things, but he's both of those at once. While he does hang out with Usahara and Kumatani, his coworkers and old college roommates, he doesn't seem to have that bond and friendship at times due to the fact that it feels like he just can't relate to them and he can't open up to them. But there's this one guy that I mentioned earlier, Kikaku, the one who's always really rageful about being overworked and all the new projects that Uramichi accidentally comes up with. Uramichi often finds kinship in him. He sees like, you're experiencing the same things I'm experiencing. Maybe I can open up to you. But as they talk and they work together over time, Uramichi learns on numerous occasions that Kikaku is not what he appears to be. While he does experience some similar frustrations about the studio that they work at, as Uramichi does, the difference here is how they feel about it. And we can see that Uramichi, though frustrated, is more of the depressed, indifferent kind of guy. Whereas Kikaku is the rageful, really angry kind of guy. Maybe you don't want to leave him with a baseball bat. So in every single moment that Uramichi tries to build a connection with Kikaku, the doors of his heart instantly close as soon as he sees that anger come out. Sometimes there are people we really want to connect and relate with, especially if they're exhibiting some similar things that we feel. But oftentimes the vibes are off, and if the vibes are off, the friendship's not happening. These are just some of the biggest themes that I see prominent within the story of Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan. I'm sure that if we sit down and dissect it even further, there's much more. And these things are presented by way of the lessons, hence the title Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan. Each of these lessons, as I see it, is a way to explain to the children and the audience how to better navigate adulthood. And while we won't be going through those lessons verbatim, I think you could kind of see what these lessons may be about through the different themes that we've discussed that are presented in the story of Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan. But if it really interests you, and if you haven't watched and choose to watch or read Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan, maybe I'll come back with a video in regards to all of the different lessons presented in Uramichi Oniisan thus far, probably in the manga as well. Hopefully you enjoyed this video on the different themes of adulthood that's present in the story of Life Lessons with Uramichi Oniisan. I hope that if you have not watched or you have not read the manga, that you can experience it firsthand yourself. If you want to watch it, it's available on Crunchyroll, and if you want to read it, you can read it on the K-Manga app, or you can buy the book, I believe, maybe in Barnes & Noble. Kodansha publishes them, so I'm sure you can find it on Kodansha's website as well. Oh, and what's really awesome about the volumes that Kodansha sells is that it's essentially 2 volumes in one. It's pretty freaking thick. This specific volume has 16 chapters. But if you have read the story or watched the anime, please comment below on what are your favorite themes that are presented within the story. Maybe it's something I have not mentioned. And if you did enjoy this video, please take the opportunity to like the video, subscribe, comment on your thoughts of this video so I can know whether to continue to make more videos like this, or share with a friend if you enjoyed it that much. However, that's gonna do it for me. I'm Mel, the host of Mel, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye!